Putin News Now: Russia's unconcerned response to the Western embargo. Rather than stunting Russia's development, Gurish Lingana argues that Western countries' economic sanctions over the past few years have weakened the United States and its allies' global influence. Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke at the 8th Eastern Economic Forum, EEF, held September 10–13 at the Far Eastern Federal University, FEFU, in Vladivostok. He stressed the importance of Russia being self-sufficient, particularly in security and defense. But he made it clear that self-sufficiency is not the same thing as isolating the country. Instead, it meant that Russia would strengthen itself through cooperation with its allies and the incorporation of the vast majority of the world's population. Russia's trade with Asia-Pacific, APAC, countries increased by 13.7% in 2022 and by an additional 18.3% in the first half of 2023, Putin noted, despite the pressure of sanctions from the West. Conferencia Económica del Este. With the intention of bolstering and encouraging economic development in Russia's Far East, the Eastern Economic Forum, EEF, was established in 2015. Relationship with Asia-Pacific countries. In its 8 years of existence, the forum has grown into a major international forum that connects Russian and international investors and helps them find new business opportunities in the Far East. Over 50 countries are represented at the forum, with the largest delegations coming from China, Myanmar, India, Mongolia, and Laos. In response to Russia's denazification and demilitarization operation in Ukraine, the United States and its allies imposed severe economic sanctions across virtually the entire Russian economy. Further, Western nations cut off Russia's access to the SWIFT financial transaction system and froze central bank assets. However, the restrictions placed on dollar-based payments have prompted many nations to switch to using their own currencies in trade and to move their savings out of the United States. Putin highlighted the decline in trust in the Western financial system at the forum, which coincides with this shift. As for Russia's $300 billion gold reserves, the country's president said, "We essentially gained twice as much." Dmitry Suslov, an economics professor at Russia's Higher School of Economics, claimed that sanctions had failed to deter the country. He also said that attempts to form an anti-Russian coalition had failed because most countries didn't side with the West against Russia. He thinks that the American public is getting fed up with the fact that the ongoing conflict in Ukraine has not resulted in a victory for the United States and Kiev. The West can either admit defeat, which would be politically damaging, or it can escalate the situation, both of which have negative consequences. Is the United States out of choices? Professor Joe Siracusa, a political scientist at Australia's Curtin University, praised President Putin for his unambiguous message. Putin is moving forward with his plans despite mounting tensions with the United States and Western nations. Since its inception in 2015, the EEF has been successfully promoting business investment, education, and urban development in the Far East. Siracusa is astounded by the normalcy of the region and President Putin's planning for its growth. Siracusa believes that the United States has exhausted all of its options because it was unable to significantly impact Russia's economy as intended. The United States has cautioned its allies against engaging in trade with Russia. However, the Australian professor claims that this threat is largely meaningless. He notes that severe sanctions have already been imposed by the United States on both Russia and North Korea. The professor is of the opinion that the effectiveness of such sanctions is dwindling due to their inherent constraints. He claims that the sanctions are already hurting American businesses, individuals, and allies abroad by making it more difficult for them to import necessities like food and fuel. Putin, in Siracusa's view, is proving that Russia's economy can function despite the many sanctions imposed by Washington. The existence of the EEF is further proof of this resiliency. Successful Asian cooperation. According to a source in the Russian state-owned news agency and radio broadcast service Sputnik, Russia's success in maintaining and strengthening its partnerships in the APAC region lies in Moscow's balanced and non-political approach. In sharp contrast to the U.S. administration's pivot to Asia, which involves isolating and constraining certain countries, fostering divisions among regional allies, and pressing APAC nations to choose sides, Russia's strategy in Asia focuses on fostering cooperation and mutual benefit. Putin's message at the forum, as reported by Syracusa, was unambiguous. You can interact with Russia without getting dragged into a larger game of power politics. Everyone had to pick a side during the Cold War era, but the Indians were notorious for not aligning with either bloc. They continue to take a position of neutrality. Therefore, the capacity to conduct business without involving other people's geopolitical matters is crucial. The Australian academic has pointed out that there are many promising business opportunities in Russia's Far East. Mineral resources abound, as do business possibilities, educational advancements, and other advantages. This region, with its abundant buried resources, has great potential as the global demand for minerals and possibly fossil fuels increases. Putin, for his part, has argued that the Far East of Russia will remain strategically important well into the future. Investing trends in the Far East are currently 3 times more significant than those in Russia as a whole, the Russian president said. The Russian president wants to improve transportation throughout the country by building high-speed highways across Siberia and the Far East that reach all the way to the Pacific Ocean. The integration of the Power of Siberia and Sakhalin-Khabarovsk-Vladivostok gas pipeline systems is also anticipated to significantly boost industrial development in the Far East. Pivot to Asia versus Asia strategy. Moscow is expanding its connections and influence in the East at a time when the United States is expanding its military presence in the Asia-Indo-Pacific region. This has resulted in open challenges to China, Russia, and North Korea, and has also sparked fears of a new nuclear arms competition among ASEAN member states. At the same time, the United States has stated that it does not intend to contain China and has presented new proposals for logistical and infrastructure development in an effort to reassure its regional allies. International experts are skeptical of the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC, a recent initiative of the Biden administration unveiled at the G20 meeting. Officials have expressed concern that this infrastructure project will fail to materialize in the same way that other lofty G7 initiatives have done so far. According to Syracusa, the idea that the United States is working to deepen and broaden its ties with India lacks political and military weight. The United States seems to be making an effort to develop ties with India, but there is no guarantee that the Indian government will treat the United States with the same level of interest. However, the idea that the United States will significantly benefit from India in terms of resources or military cooperation through domestic development efforts might not be realistic, he continued. Syracusa interprets this as a sign that the Americans may not have a firm grasp on Australia's position. It's possible that they misunderstand what AUKUS stands for and dismiss its relevance to India as a result. They may find that the power of the Quad alliance is minimal. The AUK-US arrangement appears to have little effect at this time. Since the early stages of the Cold War, the United States' closest allies in the Far East have been South Korea and Japan. The Australian academic is convinced that they have been intrinsically linked for centuries. The role of the U.S. government's deep state. The United States is losing influence in Asia and the Pacific, and their Ukrainian allies have been mired in a failed counteroffensive for the better part of 3 months. Many Americans, especially conservative Republicans, are becoming increasingly critical of Washington's approach to Russia and the situation in Ukraine. They claim it is costly and counterproductive to the United States' efforts to increase its influence in the Asia-Pacific. They may not be the majority, but they are growing in the United States. The Biden administration runs the risk of losing the 2024 presidential election if its attention is divided between Eastern Europe and Asia. Suslov adds that things seem to be made worse by the fact that the current U.S. government is having trouble changing course.